Hey guys, welcome back to Breakfast and Bible. I'm Ree, and I know I've been gone for a long time. I apologize. There have been some things that I wanted to discuss in this series. We've been talking about what it means to be a woman of God, and we've been looking into different verses and different women of the Bible. And there is one thing that women experience at much higher rates than men that is very hard to talk about because it's very sad and it's very heavy, and a lot of people basically just avoid the topic. But I didn't want to be one of those people because it is real and it is something that we do need to talk about. And there are, in fact, people in the Bible and Bible verses that concern this topic. And so we're going to discuss them. Um, I am putting this part in the front of this video to warn you that we will be talking about some heavy topics for the next couple of episodes, and that we will be talking about sexual assault and rape. And therefore, these episodes may be triggering, they may be emotional, they may be discomforting, uncomfortable. I think that's the word I'm looking for. And they're not going to be for the faint of heart. And they are probably not going to be for younger children. I will try to keep what I say to be clean. I don't plan to be saying anything explicit. I generally don't. But since it is about sexual assault, we will be talking about sex and such things. Therefore, if you are young and you don't think you should be listening to that, then that is for you to decide. If you are a parent deciding whether your child should listen to this, then you may want to listen to the whole thing before you let them listen and then make that decision between you and your child. So I wanted to put these disclaimers out up front before I actually get into the episode, because, like I said, it is very serious. Now, I have known since we started this Woman of God series that eventually this was going to be part of it. In fact, these next couple of episodes are probably some of the first episodes that popped into my head when I decided that I wanted to talk about being a woman of God and the women of the Bible and things like that. Because there are three women in the Bible who rarely get talked about. And excuse my nails. Sorry. I need to get them done. Sorry. But yes, there are three women in the Bible who do not get talked about hardly ever. I did not know who they were until I was over 21. And I found out who they were because I was reading the Bible on my own. Not because I went to church and a pastor talked about it. Not because I went to a Bible study and somebody talked about it. It was literally just I was sitting there reading the Bible going, I didn't know that was in here. I didn't know that was in here. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Right? Like, that is how I found out that these women existed. And I don't think that that is right. I think that's a travesty to the stories about them. I think that's a travesty to our church. And I think it's a missed opportunity to talk about something that is very important. And sexual assault doesn't just happen to women, it happens to men as well. But it is definitely something that the church should be talking about, especially considering the history of the church. And we're not gonna open that can of worms, but you guys know what I mean when I say especially considering the history of the church, which is probably why people avoid talking about it. Because let's be honest, mankind is prone to, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And a lot of the allegations that non-believers have against the Bible being sexist are actually church leaders being sexist, even though it has nothing to do with the Bible. So think about that as we go through this series. Now, overall, there is a lot of information in the Bible concerning sexual assault. There are a lot of women in the Bible who experience sexual assault, and their stories are actually told in the Bible. So I'm going to have to break this up into 5 parts. In fact, I've already attempted to film this once and it was way too long and it was already broken up. So bear with me, y'all. We're going to try to make it in like 30 to 40 minutes, but bear with me, okay? So we're going to have 5 episodes. We're going to talk about Dinah, we're going to talk about Tamar, and we're going to talk about the unnamed concubines. They are all explicitly said to have been raped. We are also going to talk about Bathsheba, but we're going to talk about her when we talk about laws, because there is just a general question about whether or not she could actually consent, and that deals with more of like the nuances of laws and consent. And in that section, we're going to talk about Old Testament and New Testament laws, as well as like our modern definitions and modern laws and things like that. So we'll save that for the end. I also want to talk about false accusations, because that is a big deal as well. And we have an example of that with Potiphar's wife, who Potiphar was the man who took Joseph as a slave when he was in Egypt, and his wife accuses Joseph of rape, false accusation. So we're going to talk about that and what all happens there in the 4th segment. So 5 segments. It's going to be rough, y'all. I really knew that I wanted to do this, but it's been hard sitting down to record it because it is such a heavy topic, and it is something that I don't really want to think about because it is heavy and it is hard. It's not a happy, fluffy topic that makes me happy to talk about. And so that is why it has taken me so long to do this. If you notice, I did use the sexual assault awareness ribbon up here. Before we get into all of this deep, heavy stuff, I do want to try to make you guys smile a little and tell you guys about how crazy my brain was as I was trying to put this series together. So back when I originally started planning this series, I wanted to release it during Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which is in April. And I kept saying in my mind, okay, I got to release this during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. It's April. I did this all throughout the month of April. And May 1st came, and I was sitting here starting to record, starting to pull together Bible verses. I have an unpublished blog post that I started writing to go with the video. And I looked at the calendar and was like, it's May 1st. But Sexual Assault Awareness Month is April. Wait, I missed the whole month. And it was crazy because it was on the forefront of my mind the entire month. The entire month I was like, yes, I am going to release this content during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I don't know what happened, guys. Like, I was literally saying I'm going to release this in April, and not realizing that it was April. I totally dropped the ball. And that's why you guys are getting this in October. Still, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. That has nothing to do with sexual assault, but it's still a month for women. So we're doing this in October, and I am going to talk about Dinah today. So let's talk about Dinah. Now, interestingly, you would think that this would be really easy to get through really quickly, because Dinah, who is the daughter of Jacob, the only named daughter of Jacob, there's not much said about Dinah. Dinah herself, her name probably appears maybe 3 or 4 times within the text, and after we find out that she has been raped, she basically fades into the background and we don't hear anything else about her. Her story is given in Genesis 34. Her birth is given in Genesis 30. We find out in Genesis 46 that she went with the family into Egypt when they fled the famine. But outside of that and finding out that she has been raped, majority of Genesis 34 is about her family's reaction to the rape. And, originally when I started planning this episode, I wanted to talk about, the reaction of her family as well as, some other things. But as I tried to record it the first time, I realized that it's very long. I do have a blog post that goes with this episode that goes into pretty much everything that I was thinking and studying as I was getting this episode together. So if you want all of that content, you can go there. But in the interest of keeping this video more concise and shorter so that people are not scared away by the runtime, I actually just want to focus on this one little thing that I wrote right here about the fact that we're never given her reaction and the question of whether or not she is the one who tells Jacob what happened. So when you look at the story of Dinah, we get 2 verses in the beginning that tell us that Dinah went to town to be with the women of the town. Presumably, these would have been women her age. And while I have seen articles that suggest this was her way of trying to conform to the culture around her, I also am very much aware that she is the only named daughter of Jacob. Now, when everything goes down and when stuff hits the fan, Shechem and his father say that, their sons can marry Jacob's daughters and vice versa and all this other stuff, which implies that there were other young women in Jacob's camp, but those young women may have been servants, or they might have meant future women, like the daughters of the sons, because at some point the sons get married as well. And I don't know if this is before or after this situation with Dinah. When you're talking about 12 kids, you got age range, right? Like, Dinah, if Dinah is, 15, 16, 17, 18, we don't know how old she is, but if she's, in that range, and she was the baby in terms of Leah's children, then, her oldest brothers, Reuben, could have been 30 something. He could have been 40 something. He could have had a daughter of his own at this point. So, we don't really know what the camp looked like, but we can say that it's very probable that Dinah was the only girl her age in the camp. It's very possible that she was around boys all day and the men all day, and she just wanted to have a girls' night, y'all. She just wanted to go see the girls and relax and talk about shoes and whatever girls in that time period talked about. Okay? So we get that in the first line, that she went to be with these women. And then in the second line, we find out that this man named Shechem, who was the prince of that town, took her, laid with her, and defiled her, according to the King James Version. Some versions explicitly say rape. Others use phrases like defiled, humbled, disgraced, etc. And in the blog post, I go more into depth about that. But like I said, we're going to try to focus in on one thing at a time. So, and of course, if you guys want me to come back and discuss those things in another episode, let me know in the comment section and I'll make time to try to do that as well. But outside of this characterization that she went somewhere and she got raped, we don't hear anything else from Dinah. We don't know if she went straight home afterwards. We don't know if she's the one who told Jacob. It does seem like Jacob knew before Shechem and his father got there. It sounds like Jacob found out what happened prior to this. And so either someone witnessed it and went and told Jacob, or Dinah herself came home and told her family what had happened to her. But that's where everything stops from Dinah's point of view. After that, it goes into Shechem trying to acquire her as a wife and sending his father to try to acquire this woman whom he has violated as a wife. And then it goes into Jacob and his son's reaction to Shechem trying to acquire her as a wife. And I've seen many people complain about this and, of course, discuss this. And when you read this, particularly as a woman, it's like, why did they take away her voice? Why didn't Dinah get to talk about her own experience? Why aren't we focusing in on how Dinah felt and what she was doing during all of this? Why, when they start having this conversation, was she sitting at the table listening? we don't get her reaction. Like when Shechem says, I want to marry this woman, is Dinah like, yes, this will be good because now my prospects are low? Is she like, how dare he? Is she angry? Like, we don't get any of this. We don't know what her reaction is. All we know is what her family decided for her. So as you read things and as you hear people talk about it, this can become one of the major hurdles of understanding the passage. And of course, as a woman, like I said, this is where people start accusing the Bible of being sexist, and saying that they didn't care about her opinion, and that's why it wasn't there. Then you will start getting things like The Red Tent, which is a book that was turned into a miniseries. I have seen the miniseries. I have not read the book, so I'm not sure how different the content is. But The Red Tent seems to be based on the assumption that Dinah was not raped and that she actually loved Shechem and that she was equally enamored with him, which of course paints Jacob and his family in a very, very bad light, which also makes it pretty anti-Judaism and anti-Christian because of the stance that they take. But it's very easy to end up in that camp when you start being like, they don't seem to care about her. They just made decisions for themselves. But I have a counter for that. So I have been studying this passage for quite some time. The first time I ever read this, I was in my early 20s, and I was deeply distraught. Not only that it happened, but that no one ever talked about it. I was like, how is this in Genesis and we never talked about what happened to Dinah? Not only did they never give her a voice in the Bible, but like the church isn't giving her a voice. Like the average Christian, if you walk up to the average Christian and say, who is Dinah? They're not going to know. Even if you pronounce it Dinah, they're not going to know. They're going to be like, who? And if you start talking about Jacob's daughters, they're going to be like, you mean his sons? And you're like, his daughter. Jacob had 12 sons, right? Like most people are completely oblivious to this poor girl's existence. And that's tragic. And I lived in that state for a very long time. And I kept coming back to it. And I kept asking myself, why didn't Moses give her a voice? And it's very easy to write it off as the patriarchy and sexism and all of these arguments that I've seen floating around on the internet. But it actually doesn't make sense, because when we get later, we're going to see, we hear Tamar's story all the way through. And it's heartbreaking. It's way more heartbreaking than Dinah's because we get Tamar's story. We don't exactly get the unnamed concubine's story from her point of view, but like we do get a whole book on Esther. We get a whole book on Ruth. We get to see, for instance, Hannah, who is the mother of Samuel. We get to see her in anguish about not being able to conceive. We get to see Elizabeth, who is the mother of John the Baptist. We see her point of view in struggling to conceive John the Baptist. Like, there are plenty of parts of the Bible where we actually get the woman's point of view, and they actually do kind of zoom in on them for a second and talk about them and their experience. So it seems odd that all of a sudden it's like, yeah, we don't care. We can't do that. We don't have time for that. And so I definitely thought that there may be something more to it. And I started looking at it more from a literary perspective. If you've been following my podcast, you know I was doing a literary devices series. I'm still going to be continuing that on the blog. And essentially, the whole point is to reshape the way you think about studying the word and using some of that knowledge to help you tackle the literature. Because at the end of the day, while the Bible is spiritual, it is also literature. And in literature, sometimes people do things to call attention to certain things, or they use certain tactics and nuances to point out something. When I went back and read it for this video, I realized something that I had not realized before. And that is where I have come to believe that the reason Moses left out Dinah's voice is actually positive, but it's also way more significant than people say. It's actually the opposite of sexist. Now, to go into this, I want to give you guys an antecedent story. When I was in high school, one of my classmates was killed by her ex-boyfriend. She was in the process of trying to break up with him. He did not like it. He got mad. She jumped out of the car and ran. He followed her. He stabbed her to death, and she died. In the aftermath of her dying, people drug her name through the mud. People were talking about the pictures that she had posted on MySpace. I know I'm dating myself by telling you guys that, but this was the era of MySpace. And, you know, people were talking about the pictures she had posted. They were talking about the age difference between her and the guy. People were accusing her of being a prostitute. There was just so much that people were saying about her. And, you know, I remember being like, what does that have to do with the fact that he killed her? Like, I don't care if she was a prostitute. I don't care if she was a drug addict. I don't care if she was posting pictures of herself naked online. That don't give nobody the right to kill her. It doesn't. And as I got older, I noticed this happens pretty much consistently. When women say that they have been raped, when anything happens to a woman. I remember in college, a woman was raped. She went out to run and someone raped her. The initial report said that she was out running at like midnight. And people were like, well, why was she out running at midnight, especially by herself in the dark? Like, that's dangerous. That's why she got raped. Later, they backtracked and said that it happened around 10. And people were still like, oh, why was she out that late at night jogging? Like, that doesn't make sense. And it's really like, instead of being like, why was somebody out waiting for somebody to be out jogging and, you know, attacking them while they're just trying to be a healthy, fit person? Like, what about that? What was wrong with this dude? Why was he out here lurking at 10 o'clock at night, right? But a lot of times the blame is placed on the woman. It's why was she wearing that? Why was she in that location? Why was she by herself, right? All of these questions come out about the woman when something happens. And there are a lot of things that go into that, but one of the reasons people do this subconsciously is to separate themselves from the action. So when my friend, when my friends and I were in high school and all of this talk was going on about this young girl who had been killed, the adult women who were saying this, they weren't really saying, well, she posted suggestive pictures on MySpace, therefore she deserved to get killed. That's not what they were saying. That's how it comes off. But what they were saying is, my daughter does not post suggestive pictures on MySpace. Therefore, her boyfriend is not going to try to kill her. That's what they're thinking. They're saying, my daughter does not date men that are, 4 or 5 years older than them, that are coming to the house and picking them up before school, or they're not staying over at their boyfriend's house. Therefore, they're not going to get stabbed to death by their boyfriend. This is what happens. I would never go out jogging at 10 o'clock at night. I jog in the middle of the day. So no one is ever going to jump out and attack me and try to rape me when I jog, because I'm not doing it at unsafe hours. it's really not about blaming the victim so much as trying to comfort themselves into this idea that it won't happen to them or that it won't happen to us. I think that subconsciously, this is what we do. Now, I realize there are some people who are just evil people. I've seen y'all lurking on the internet. I've heard them in real life. There are some people who are actually evil and who are actually like, yes, you were out at 10 o'clock at night. You deserve what you deserve. We're not worried about those people. Those people need prayer. They need salvation. They need a whole lot. They need therapy. They need a lot. And we don't have time to dedicate to them. But on the note of this other group where I think that subconsciously you're just trying to distance yourself from the action, I think this is where the story of Dinah gets really interesting, because we're not given a single bit of information about Dinah to distance ourselves from this story. Dinah could be anyone. Dinah was a girl who went out into town, right? Let's say to the town, like, I mean, she's basically going to like a marketplace or something. It's like going to the mall, right? Dinah woke up, she went to the mall to get her nails done. I need to go get my nails done. Don't judge me, guys. She went to go get her nails done. She went to go shopping or whatever. She just went to sit around with the girls and talk about the local boys, who was cute, who wasn't cute, whatever. She was just a girl out. She could have been the most beautiful girl in the world. She could have been an average looking girl. She could have been what the society deemed as not attractive. She could have been fat. She could have been skinny. She could have been tall or short. She could have been curvaceous. She could have been not curvaceous. She could have had like a childlike innocence, or she could have been a little sultry and a little seductive. She could have been fully covered. Like, she could have had her hair covered. She could have had all of her body covered, everything completely covered. Or she could have been, showing what she had to show, right? She could have had on makeup. She could have not had on makeup. She could have had on jewelry. She could have not had on jewelry. We're not told a single thing about Dinah. Not at the time of the incident, not before the incident, not after the incident. We know nothing about her personality. We know nothing about how she behaved. We know nothing about how she reacted to Shechem's advances. Nothing. She could be me. She could be you. She could be any one of us. All we know is that it happened to her, because it can happen to anybody. And I think the reason we're not given her story is because the moral of the story is that there was a wrong. Shechem wronged Dinah. And in any case of sexual assault, the aggressor is the one who is wrong. The aggressor is the one with the problem. The aggressor is the one who did something. It is never the victim or the survivor's fault. It is not, they should have been here, or they should have done this, or they should have not had on that, or whatever. No, it's not about them. It's about a problem that exists within the aggressor. And that comes out by not actually focusing on Dinah, because it wasn't about Dinah. It was about a problem that Shechem had. And clearly his father was, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know how you make something like that right. Based on what his father says, it doesn't sound the most caring. It doesn't sound like the right thing to do. But also, like, what do you do? Like, you find out that your son has, assaulted this girl, and he's saying he wants to marry her. Do you go offer money to marry her? Do you just go say, like, I'm sorry this happened? Do you kill your own son? Like, what do you do to atone for that, right? So I don't know how he was supposed to react, but a lot of this is about the fallout and the reaction. And the second underlying point is that two wrongs don't make a right, which, as much as we don't want to hear, because we don't get Dinah's voice and we don't actually talk about this story, we don't want to get to that point that Jacob's sons going out and killing everybody in the village to avenge Dinah was not the best plan ever, right? Two wrongs don't make a right. You know, it may have been one thing if they had gone and killed Shechem, which I'm not suggesting that because he raped her, he deserved to die. But at least you would be attacking the person who inflicted pain, right? Like, it's a one for one type of a thing. But killing the entire town, killing all of the men, all of his soldiers, like, that's, they didn't rape your sister, right? Like, how does that help the situation? So, I think the story is about how you cope. And one thing people also neglect to talk about when talking about the Bible is the people of the Bible are not perfect. They're not. We see this all of the time. Abraham was a liar. Jacob was a trickster. Noah was a drunk. David was an adulterer and a murderer. Right? A lot of the people who we look at as heroes in the Bible are just like us. They're flawed and they don't necessarily handle things in the most correct way. I think that what was meant to be gleaned from this is, like I said, it could happen to anyone, and to focus in on the fact that her family believed her. I wrote down a couple of things that I noticed. I do want to show my notebook again. I know usually I show my notebook the whole time, but since we weren't really going off of it, it seemed a little weird. But I wrote down some things that I noticed while reading it. And, one of the things that I wrote was that, no one blamed Dinah. This is starkly contrasted. Her own brother, Judah, which is her brother, later in Genesis 38, he finds out that his daughter-in-law is pregnant. She is a widow and she is pregnant out of wedlock. And he is furious. Everyone in town is calling her, harlot and all kinds of names. And when they do, he suggests that she be burnt alive. Right? That is a very different reaction than what they have when this happens to Dinah, which shows that they believed that Dinah had truly been assaulted. They didn't think that Dinah just was fast or, hot in the tail, as they say where I'm from. They really believed that she had been wronged for them to have taken her side. They did take her side. They did not force her to marry a rapist. We're going to talk about that a lot when we get into the 5th section. And so even though they take it a little far, and, it's only 2 of the brothers who kill people, but, in verses 13 and 14, it seems like all the brothers were kind of in on it, and that they all knew that none of them were actually going to uphold this idea that she would actually marry Shechem. I think really the things that we're supposed to get from this is that the people were on her side. And even though we don't necessarily see this whole family thing of them coming together and supporting her, I do believe that is what happened in the family. And I also wanted to point out before we go that by removing the female presence from this, by not having a woman in the conversation, not focusing on the woman saying it, it proves that the men had the ability to discern that it was wrong without a woman having to be there to tell them it's wrong. And the reason I think it's important to point this out and to notice this in here is that when you look at modern cases, like for instance, Brock Turner, y'all, I will never let that die. Brock Turner raped this girl. It was like he was caught in the act. People called the police. He went to trial. The judge only gave him 6 months, and he only had to serve 3 of those months. And in a lot of these cases, they're like, oh, we don't want this to tarnish his future. We don't want, he has such a bright future ahead of him, blah, blah, blah. And nobody ever talks about how he has damaged this girl's life. It's always about the man. And when you have men in a room together, they seem to act like they don't know that there's a problem. When they pick juries for these types of cases, they try to, make sure the jury's not biased. So they're not going to make an all-female jury because they're afraid that the women will bias against the man, or whatever. And of course, the person who's accusing will try to find more female jurors because they think that the men are not going to be sympathetic to the woman. But the fact is, it should not take a woman's presence for a man to hear this and say that is wrong and stand for the woman. And I think that is ultimately what we're supposed to get from the story of Dinah. So with that being said, I have managed to keep this. With that being said, thank you for sticking around. Leave me comments in the description box if you have questions or concerns or something that you want to hear more about. If there is a section or another example of sexual assault that I have not mentioned in the beginning that will be covered, that you want covered, let me know that information as well. Thank you again for making it this far. If you are someone who has experienced sexual assault, I am deeply sorry. I love you, and just know that it is not your fault. You are loved by me, by your community, by the Father, which is the most important love that you can have. And I hope that you are well and that you have a good support system around you. If you do not, there are lots of resources online. I hope that you will reach out to someone that you trust and that you feel safe around to help you heal and to help you move forward. That being said, I will see you guys soon.